Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are continuing our interpretation, exploration, immersion into Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching. Yes. I'm still not getting the notes right. Ash, yes, 42 is for Ash. Okay. So what we are going to do today is we are going to read our favorite poems. I think of them as poems from Tao Te Ching. And then we're going to discuss them. So we have the following ones. We'll just go in the order in which. So it's going to be, Madeline is going to start with 6. And you are welcome to talk about, just read the poem. I will announce. So just on a piece of paper, folks, use this high technology, make a list of all the ones that we are going through. Keep your translations handy. If you think that your translation adds to what is being said and you would like to read it out for any of these poems, you're welcome to do that. So we will read some poems and then we'll discuss a little bit about it and we will go on. Okay, so I'm delighted that so many of us are reading the poems, and we will go from that. You're welcome. Once somebody reads a poem, if you would like to read your own translation of it, just go ahead and put it. Also, just for our reference, go ahead and put the name of when you are reading the poem. After you're done reading it, immediately after that, put the name of the translator and the number. So if somebody likes the translation you're reading, they can go ahead and check that out. All right. So today, that's all we're going to do. We're just going to read this. So we will start off with Madeline. And so it's going to be Madeline, followed by me. It's going to be 25. So let me make a list here. So it's going to be 6 from Madeline, then 25 from Shrikant, then 27 from Kevin. Then we're going to go to 35 by David, 36 by Joe, 38 by Elena, 42 by Ash, 63 by Leah, and 78 by Franklin. That's what we're going to start off with. And if you would like to share any poem that you would like to read out, you're welcome to do that. Okay. So Madeline, please do the honors.
Yes, I was wondering, the one I have, it's only 5 lines long. Is it okay if I read 2 translations of it?
Of course.
Okay. So here's the first one. The valley spirit never dies. It is the woman, primal mother. Her gateway is the root of heaven and earth. It is like a veil, barely seen. Use it. It will never fail. And now I'm going to go to the other translation. The valley spirit, undying, is called the mystic female. The gate of the mystic female is called the root of heaven and earth. It flows continuously, barely perceptible. Utilize it. It is never exhausted.
Thank you. Would you like to talk briefly about what you like about this?
Sure. I like the connection with the land and the valley. And apparently in modern Chinese, one of the pronunciations of yin, which is the one aspect of yin, is that it's female, is that it can mean shady or cloudy, or to shelter or to shade something.
Mm-hmm.
I like the sense of nurturing and having something, a place where everything comes from. some deep place, and a gateway like a veil that is barely seen. I think there's a quote from a Christian saint that is goes something like, "You are the veil that lies between you and the paradise that you seek."
Wow. Wow. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madeline. What we'll do is that we will go ahead and go through all these poems. And after all of that, each person, go ahead and read the poem. If anybody wants to read another translation of any of the poems, you're welcome to do that. Go ahead and just type ! And you're welcome to read another translation. And Madeline, and if you could go ahead, put the names of both the translators in the chat, if somebody wants to follow up with that. And folks, please do that so that we can go ahead. So I'm going to read number 25. And it has been my favorite right from the beginning, because I think it sets the context for the entire book for me. My name for it is Four Greatnesses. I'm reading from the Ursula Lingman translation. There is something that contains everything. Before heaven and earth it is. Oh, it is still, unbodied, all on its own, unchanging, all pervading, ever moving. So it can act as the mother of all things. Not knowing its real name, we only call it the way. If it must be named, let its name be great. Greatness means going on. Going on means going far. And going far means turning back. So they say, the way is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and humankind is great. Four greatnesses in the world, and humanity is one of them. People follow earth. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the way. The way follows what is. The thing I like about this poem is that this four-part division I have found to really eliminate the whole work. So I think this is, for me, this is like the summary view of the entire book. So that's why I like it. Next up is going to be Kevin with number 27.
Thank you, Shanka. I like your chapter 25 you picked. So 27, I like it. It's got 11 words about kindness, good. So that's part for me. That's the biggest thing. What he intends to do, what's your purpose, what's the value, drive everything. So I pick this about kindness. So I'm going to use Derek Ling, and plus my myself interpretation. I feel it's not after translation, this words, meaningful words is lots. Okay, I'm going to start reading. A good traveling doesn't leave tracks. Good speech doesn't seek faults. Good writing doesn't use counters. Good closure needs no bar, and yet cannot be opened. Good note needs no loop, yet cannot be united. Therefore, sage says, often save others, and so don't abandon anyone, and often save things, and don't abandon anything. This is called following enlightenment. Therefore, the good person is the teacher of the bad person. The bad person is the source of a good person. those who don't value their teachers and don't love their resource. Although intelligent, they are greatly confused. This is called essential wonder. Yeah, I'm going to couple sentences do my summary my own way. Let's see.
Please.
It's about the kindness from Buddhism for all religions and secular. All your mind of peace of mind is central. If I talk to you, how deep a stranger may use my heart to talk to you, I don't think anybody can take offense. So they say the first like kindness is no track. You don't need this things doing something good. I need to leave something for my fate, or for my reputation, for money. No, if I doing good, it's good. Maybe you can for yourself peace. The last one is this is called even I'm smart, God wisdom. I like stupid, I like kids. That's called essential of wonder. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. That was wonderful. Franklin, go ahead.
I would read number 27 from the Jia Fu Feng, if that's appropriate.
Please do.
A good walker leaves no tracks. A good speaker makes no slips. A good reckoner needs no tally. A good door needs no lock, yet no one can open it. Good binding requires no knots, yet no one can loosen it. Therefore the sage takes care of all men and abandons no one. He takes care of all things and abandons nothing. This is called following the light. What is a good man? A teacher of a bad man. What is a bad man? A good man's charge. If the teacher is not respected and the student not cared for, confusion will arise, however clever one is. This is the crux of mystery.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Franklin. Folks, you're always welcome to read your own translation that you found useful of any of the poems that are being read. Okay. Next up is going to be David with number 35. David, go ahead. David, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. This is from Stephen Mitchell's version. She who is centered in the Tao can go where she wishes without danger. She perceives the universal harmony even amid great pain because she has found peace in her heart. Music or the smell of good cooking may make people stop and enjoy, but words that point to the Tao seem monotonous and without flavor. When you look for it, there's nothing to see. When you listen for it, there's nothing to hear. When you use it, it is inexhaustible. So something that interested me about this particular poem is, this is like, I could think of it as like, this is a problem that some mystical traditions have, that they have the goal of the tradition, but how to describe it? It may seem monotonous and flavorless. For example, someone might say, oh, in this particular tradition, you do this practice and you see the truth and then you become desireless. And somebody says desireless, that sounds monotonous and flavorless. So it's an interesting thing that like the things that attract people, like in this example, music or the smell of good cooking, are not necessarily, well, the things that mystical traditions have to offer are very different seeming, it seems, looking at it this way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, David. And folks, feel free to volunteer to read any more poems. So I'm going to put you, we're going to go in order. So in the second round, we're going to start with Donna with number 1. Okay, so we're just going to go down the list. So it's going to be, after David, it's going to be Elena, Ash, Leah, Franklin, and then, oh no, wait a minute, I missed Joe. So Joe is going to be next. So Joe, Elena, Ash, Leah, Franklin, and then Donna. And then, yes, then Donna. Wonderful. So I'm going to read out the same poem just to show it, because I think each of the translations, as I've realized, all of these are interpretations, and each person brings their own thought to it. And I find that I get more richness by reading multiple translations. So this is again from Ursula Lingman. So my name for it is Gentle Power of Tao. Hold fast to the great thought, and all the world will come to you, harmless, peaceable, and serene. Walking around, we stop for music, for food. But if you taste the way, it's flat, insipid. It looks like nothing much. It sounds like nothing much. And yet, you can't get enough of it. Okay, next up is Joe with 36.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I mean, this one spoke to me in particular. It's not my favorite. I had a few others that would have probably been my favorite, but I thought that this one would be an interesting point of discussion. So it is number 36. Should you want to contain something, you must deliberately let it expand. Should you want to weaken something, you must deliberately let it grow strong. Should you want to eliminate something, you must deliberately allow it to flourish. Should you want to take something away, you must deliberately grant it access. The lesson here is called the wisdom of obscurity. The gentle outlast the strong, the obscure outlast the obvious. Fish cannot leave deep waters, and a country's weapons should not be displayed. And that's the Wayne Dwyer's version of it. And the reason I found this to be interesting is that it is about obscurity, the importance of obscurity, but I also saw another connection, is it also talks about the idea of not having a rigid way of looking at things, and how you can achieve not balance per se, but you can be like water and flow in between weakness and strength, and eliminate something and still flourish, and take away something and still gain access to something else. And that to me is really an important part of the Tao, is being this way in a state of flow versus having a fixed way of looking at things. And this is really what was really spoke to me about this, was so many of these times that we have an idea that we look for balance, and we try to make balance, and we have a fixed way of looking. Well, I need to get this much time in to do this. I need to get this much time, and I need to achieve balance, because balance is going to, as opposed to just being in a state of flow in between these two feelings. And I think that that's something that spoke to me, and it really jumped off the page at me, because I always think about the importance of balance, as opposed to going in between weakness and strength. You do need to become weak in order to understand strength. So I that's what kind of stuck out to me. There was the idea of not displaying your weapons, as well as the importance of obscurity. And that really also speaks to the Tao too, is the idea of living harmoniously with others. It's kind of, and you have this yin and yang kind of feeling to it as well. You have the weapons, but you don't show them, and that's the balance that you really want in order to live harmoniously. And I'll leave it at that for now. There was a few other points that I had taken from this, but there are so many great poems in here, but I found that this one had a unique a way of describing the yin and incorporating the yin and the yang and the differences, and really changed my approach from taking a balanced approach to life to more of a being like water in a state of flow.
Wonderful, wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Elena, followed by Ash. Elena.
Right, I'm leaving. I'm reading number 38. Power. True power does not emphasize its strength, thus demonstrating true abilities. False power emphasizes its existence, thus lacking real strength. True power does nothing, having no motive to accomplish. False power abides, waiting for a certain moment to strike, doing nothing. Those who follow the way do not put themselves above the law. They strive within willing hands to lead others along the way. When they lose their way, they strive toward goodness. When they lose goodness, they try to be kind. When they lose kindness, they strive for justice. And when justice is lost, they strive to perform legal forms, rituals, to reassure themselves of their patriotism and loyalty, spouting opinions, watering the flowers of ignorance. Thus, the wise abide with divine unity, living within the seed of truth, casting the shell away, living with it within the flow, letting go of the unnecessary retaining of the heart. So what attracted me to this particular piece is and very often there are false pretenses that society wants us to consider, such as, oh, do good things, say, like for instance, you have still 1 hour of your life, so you need, why are you sitting here? Just do something for this charity or that charity and such. So you're being torn sometimes into pieces by being saying that whatever you're doing is not right. You have to sacrifice yourself. You have to do this and that. When in reality, very often what we call kindness and what we call goodness is just emptiness within. When people have nothing within, they try to fill their time with something that's being given to them as but you have to do it. You want to be good, you want to be a great citizen, do that. So I think it's one of the things that attracted me. And because if I'm looking for a balance in between doing and non-doing, and that's where I am.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
Thank you, Elena. This is a great choice and good comments. Thank you. Next up is Hugo. Hugo, would you like to read your own version, your own translation? Hugo, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't ready. Let me pull up the. So yeah, I was going to read number 33 from.
Oh, then you go. Then wait. What we're going to do is that we'll come to you. You know what? You okay. Started. So go ahead. Go ahead. So what we're going to do,
we can circle back to me if you
okay,
want.
We'll circle back to you. So I'll put you in line. So it's going to be Ash, then Leah, Franklin, Donna, Brian, and then Hugo. Okay. Excellent. So I just want to say one thing, that all of this, one of the things about Tao Te Ching and these Chinese presentations is the imagery that they use and how powerful that imagery is. And some, like water, for example. And some of these translators do a fantastic job of creating their own imagery in their translation. So for example, on this the one, the number 38 that Elena read, there is a term that my translator uses. She says kernel, not the husk. And that's actually the title that I'm using for this poem. It's the kernel, not the husk. You know, people are grabbing onto the husk mostly and not realizing where the kernel is. So, so thank you very much. Next up is going to be Ash. Ash, go ahead.
Yes, so I'm going to drop the translation I'm using into the chat here. It's by a Swedish Aikido instructor and author named Stefan Stenud. And here's his interpretation of chapter 42. The way gave birth to one, one gave birth to two, two gave birth to three, three gave birth to all things. All things carry yin and embrace yang. They reach harmony by blending with the vital breath. What people loathe most is to be orphaned, desolate, unworthy, but this is what princes and kings call themselves. Sometimes gain comes from losing, and sometimes loss comes from gaining. What others have taught, I also teach. The fool and violent will not die from natural causes. This will be my chief doctrine. So this chapter, I think there's kind of two separate parts to it, and some commentaries I've looked at, including this one, suggest that they probably weren't originally supposed to go together. So, you know, there's the second, this is kind of similar to the chapter that Joe read earlier about, you know, gain comes from losing and loss comes from gaining, and that, and then there's, you know, also the idea that the forceful and violent will not die from natural causes, which similar to the idea from the Bible that, you know, he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. But to me, the interesting part is the first half about the way giving birth to one and one giving birth to two. And most of the commentaries I've read take that, you know, interpret that pretty metaphorically. But I think it's actually a direct reference to the numerology of the I Ching, where, you know, if you look at the, what was it called? The Bagua, you know, you start with the yin and yang, and then it comes up with different symbols using these broken lines that consists of 3 lines each. And then you get, you know, with groups of 3 of those and, you know, 8 of those. So it's interesting to me though, we've talked a little bit about the kind of the different similarities between Eastern thought and Western thought. And I find some of the connections really fascinating. So here, for instance, you can actually draw a direct line tracing the roots from these early ideas of yin yang to like modern information technology and science, like that we're using to have this discussion right now. So Leibniz was the first Western commentator on the I Ching, and he introduced the idea of binary notation to the West directly from that, and introduced 0 and 1 symbols instead of, but that was directly based on this idea of from yin and yang from the I Ching. And then Boole and Frege developed his work, and von Neumann, you know, and others picked it up to create the basic architecture of modern computers, which is just fascinating to me that, you know, like you literally, we would not have this technology that we're using right now if it wasn't for these works of, right? And then just one other kind of connection or parallel I noticed. So the idea of, you know, 1 giving birth to 2 and 2 giving birth to 3, you know, to me, it suggests this kind of evolutionary process where you start from, you know, a basic fundamental principle, and then it gives rise, you know, to increasing levels of complexity at first, gradually, increasingly, exponentially. And that just reminded me of the ending of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, where he writes, "There is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. And that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed, From so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. So that was what this chapter reminded me of.
Wow, that was fantastic, Ash. That was great. Thanks. Next up is going to be Leah. Leah, go ahead.
This is verse 63. Act without acting. Give without giving. Taste without tasting. Tao alone becomes all things great and all things small. It is the one in many. It is the many in one. Let Tao become all your actions. Then your wants will become your treasure. Your injury will become your blessing. Take on difficulties while they are still easy. Do great things while they are still small. Step by step, the world's burden is lifted. Piece by piece, the world's treasure is amassed. So the sage stays with his daily task and accomplishes the greatest thing. Beware of those who promise a quick and easy way, for much ease brings many difficulties. Follow your path to the end. Accept difficulty as an opportunity. This is the sure way to end up with no difficulties at all.
Wonderful. What do you like about it, Leah? Why did you pick this?
What I like is that if you think of a child and then you read this, it's a completely different poem.
Mm.
It's completely different. So you could even change the name of the sage to a child, because when he talks about things like the smallest thing, take on difficulties while they are easy, do great things while they are still small.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of, especially the beginning, act without acting. I think of a very small child, give without giving, taste without tasting, just live. And you are acting, you are giving, you are doing these things without self-consciousness. And, his description of the sage sounds so much like a child to me. The sage stays with his daily task and accomplishes the greatest thing. I was just thinking of small child accomplishments and how you build and you build and you build and you build.
Wonderful. That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I mean, I think that image keeps coming back throughout this work of a child. And Franklin made a very beautiful point about what you can see the similarity between the sage and the child. But what is the difference? And the difference is that most children, as they grow up, when they deal with structure and flow, with yin and yang, that actually stops their childhood curiosity. It actually impedes their childhood curiosity as they grow. A sage manages to grow in ability, in interaction with the world, in a way where he continues to maintain the core of being the child. So I think that's what I got from that. Dave, would you like to read your translation?
No, Shrikant, I just had observation though.
No, observations later on. Let's do that later on.
Okay.
We can right now we are just having what we're doing is that people are reading all the translations.
Very good, thank you. I'll
Thank
comment
you.
later.
Next up is going to be let's see. It's going to be Franklin. Franklin, go ahead. So it's going to be Franklin, Donna, Brian, and Hugo. Franklin. Franklin, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Number 78. Under heaven, nothing is more soft and yielding than water. Yet for attacking the solid and strong, nothing is better. It has no equal. The weak can overcome the strong. The supple can overcome the stiff. Under heaven, everyone knows this, yet no one puts it into practice. Therefore, the sage says, he who takes upon himself the humiliation of the people is fit to rule them. He who takes upon himself the country's disasters deserves to be the king of the universe. The truth often sounds paradoxical. I love this, beginning with water being yielding to overcome the strongest, and the paradox of the weak overcoming the strong, the supple overcoming the stiff. We know it, but why do we not do it? Why do we get caught in doing things the difficult way? You know, it's a paradox. And then this beautiful idea that the sage is willing to take on the humiliation. You know, it's not a big ego trip. It's just the opposite. You know, it's realizing we're all struggling in this, you know, and to admit that is to become great. You know, to pretend that you're some big shot is just a mask. To realize that you know, you're struggling like everybody else is to be fit to rule them. You know, that's makes you fit to rule when you're great humility and you're not just a big ego trip. And the truth is often paradoxical, and you know, that's certainly one of the key words of understanding the Tao Te Ching is it's the paradoxical nature of this. It's like a book of koans, you know, it's just these poems to ponder and ponder and ponder, and then maybe suddenly, you know, it'll light up, or if we memorize them, you know, then they'll start to really come to life when we meet them in the real world and be like, oh, this is what this is about. This is really like a living truth.
Wonderful. This is also one of my favorites because I mean, my name for it is The Power of Water. And I'm going to read out because I think what happens is that, I mean, the way these things work for me is that you read many, many translations and you let all those translations kind of flow over you. And at each of that, something additional gets added, something gets reinforced, something gets added, because these are enormously rich works. And so I find that that's a very good way of taking them in. So this is again, Ursula Lingman. Nothing in the world is as soft, as weak as water. Nothing else can wear away the hard, the strong, and remain unaltered. Soft overcomes hard, weak overcomes strong. Everybody knows it. Nobody uses the knowledge. So the wise say, by bearing common defilements, you become a sacrificer at the altar of earth. By bearing common evils, you become a lord of the world. Right words sound wrong. So thank you, folks. What we're going to do is we're going to continue. If anybody else wants to read anything, please go ahead. If you want to read, even if you have read before, you can go ahead and read again. If you want to read another translation of anything, please go ahead and do that. So it's going to be Kevin. Kevin, go ahead. You want to read a translation of this?
I'm going to read the chapter 40.
40, then hold on, Kevin.
Okay.
I will come
short.
to you. So yeah, I will go ahead. So if you want to read a chapter, folks, go ahead and put the chapter number. So we're going to do Kevin 40, and then it's going to be Alex is going to be 45, And then Jean, if you could put which chapter you would like to read in the chat. Oh, Hugo, oh, wait a minute, Hugo, yeah, I know Hugo is there. I'm keeping track of it. Thanks, Joe. No, I have not skipped you yet. I've not skipped. So it's going to be Franklin. Now we are going back over all of the things. So it's going to be Donna, Brian, Hugo, Kevin, Alex, and Jean. Okay, so let me see. Hugo has 33. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with Donna. If anybody else wants to read, please go ahead and type just the number in there so I know that you want to read. All right, so Donna, go ahead.
Okay, I'm reading chapter 1. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the ever constant Tao. The name that can be named is not the ever constant name. That which is without name is the beginning of heaven and earth. That which possesses a name is the mother of the 10,000 creatures. Therefore, always without desire, thus you observe its subtle mystery. Always possessing desires, thus you observe its external appearances. These two, they arise from the same source, but have different names. The sameness is called their deep mystery, deep mysteries, and again, deep mysteries, the gateway of many subtle mysteries. So I just feel this so deeply because to me this is about the dualism of the ego and the source. The source is desire, and all external appearances equals the source's desires. So everything that exists in the world is the desire of source expressed. And both our ego self and the source self come from the same oneness. And it's just begins this whole beautiful set of poems, which I haven't read yet, but it's just when you feel this poem so deep within you, and you feel being the source and the ego at the same time, it is just incredible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. The first one is it's really the most expansive, mind expanding thing that there is. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, Hugo, Kevin, Alex, Jean, Franklin, and Joe. Brian.
Okay, this is number 37. The Tao everlasting does not act, and yet nothing is not done. If kings and barons can abide by it, the 10,000 things will transform by themselves. If in transforming desire is aroused, I shall suppress it by the nameless uncarved wood. With the nameless uncarved wood, there shall be no desire. Without desire, there is thus quietude. The world shall be self-ordered. When I looked at them, the two translations I have, they seemed very different. And when I look at them side by side, I can see that. I think now, reading them out sequential like this, I don't think it will come over. So perhaps I won't read the second one.
Brian, you're welcome to read the second one, because what happens is that I find that each of the translation is an interpretation and the same themes. I would love to, if you could read the second one, so that we can.
I will do. Another reason I didn't want to is when I sort of looked back and thought about them, they didn't seem to be saying the same thing, which I suppose is realistic in interpretation. But anyway, I'll give it a go. This one is by Le Guin. Mm-hmm. It's called Overall. The way never does anything, and everything gets done. If those in power could hold to the way, the 10,000 things would look after themselves. If even so they tried to act, I'd quiet them with the nameless, the natural. In the unnamed, in the unshapen, is not wanting. In not wanting is stillness. In stillness, all under heaven rests. So to me, they both seem to be along the same lines, but I noticed a variation. And perhaps rereading again, Le Guin's version is more understandable from a modern point of view. But I still like the poetry from Chen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. Next up is Hugo. Hugo, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm going to be reading number 33. The version is on Taoism.net. Those who understand others are intelligent. Those who understand themselves are enlightened. Those who overcome others have strength. Those who overcome themselves are powerful. Those who know contentment are wealthy. Those who proceed vigorously have willpower. Those who do not lose their base endure. Those who die but do not perish have longevity. Yeah, I find it beautiful, and it struck me because it's all about knowing yourself and the inward journey that one might take to know yourself better. It reminds me this tale of the Cherokee two wolves, feeding the good and the bad wolf, and how changing the word starts by changing oneself. So yeah, that's a beautiful poem, and thanks for letting me sharing it with you. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Hugo. And it looks like your dog also appreciates it a great deal.
He does. He does.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin. Kevin.
Okay, I'm going to read the chapter 40. It's I'm going to read two translations. I give the 40 is a big title from Western style, Big Bang. Resilience is a Tao in action. Vulnerability is a Tao in expression. The mirrored things in universe are conceived by existence. Existence is conceived by in-existence. Another translation is from Derek Lin. Mm-hmm. The returning is movement of Tao. The weak is utilization of the Tao. The everything are born of being. Being is born of non-being. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is going to be Alex.
Hi. Okay, so this is 45 and it's from the Le Guin one. And what I liked about Le Guin is she's very sharp, you know, in comparison to the other one, she's a bit, she takes away some of your safety net, I find. I don't know what I mean by that, but anyway, so this is 45. What's perfectly whole seems flawed, but you can use it forever. What's perfectly full seems empty, but you can't use it up. True straightness looks crooked. Great skill looks clumsy. Real eloquence seems to stammer. To be comfortable in the cold, keep moving. To be comfortable in the heat, hold still. To be comfortable in the world, stay calm and clear. And I think what I liked about that is it's kind of anti-perfection in a way, but it also recognizes our desire for perfection. So, you know, I think, you know, the most beautiful things are always the things that aren't perfect. A sketch seems more, for me anyway, seems more beautiful than a finished painting. And I think to remind ourselves of that while keeping motivated is something sort of, you know, very precious to us and a very difficult balance. But it kind of sort of, you know, recognizes the need for perfection, but, you know, to let ourselves go in the search for it in a way. Thank you.
Wonderful. So folks, after we are done reading the poems, I would like us to talk about the translations that we like and why we like it. I mean, I also like this Ursula Lingman translation a lot. So let us share what we like about the translations. Okay, so it's going to be now Jean, Franklin, and Joe. Jean, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the chapter. Which one I was going to do?
You're going to do 9.
9, yeah, okay. Yeah, I just like the one she was reading. I like that translation.
The second one also that you said you liked, that was also the same translator, Ursula Lingman.
Oh,
the one that I
good.
am using.
Yeah, maybe I should check into that.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm going to read chapter 9.
Mm-hmm.
Holding and feeling it are not as good as you stopping short. Hammering and sharpening it cannot be forever maintained. When gold and jade filled room, there's no one who can protect it. To have wealth and high rank, but this arrogance, then naturally their loss is your own fault. When the task is successful, the shelf should let go of it. This is the way of heaven. Yeah, I have this translation. I think it's just not as rhymed in some way. It's interesting when you hear different translation, they can say the same thing, but some people use it more like a poem, you know, it rhymes better. So I think I need to find a better version of translations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah, I think it's more about, you know, in China, we emphasize modesty. You know, you don't want to reach the full. You want to be modest, then you have space to grow. I think this talking about similar concept. So to be modest.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Next up is going to be Franklin, followed by Joe. And then we are going to be talking about the translations that we find useful. Franklin.
Number 66. Why is the sea king of 100 streams? Because it lies below them. Therefore, it is the king of 100 streams. If the sage would guide the people, he must serve with humility. If he would lead them, he must follow behind. In this way, when the sage rules, the people will not feel oppressed. When he stands before them, they will not be harmed. The whole world will support him and will not tire of him. Because he does not compete, he does not meet competition. Yeah, doesn't it speak for itself? So I have the Jiafu Feng and Jane English translation. I love this translation. I've been looking, you know, perusing bookshelves for 40 years, looking for Tao Teh Ching translations, and I just love this. It's sublime. The photographs for each chapter are beautiful. The poetry is very clear. And I think it, stays very clear to the essence of the paradoxes and whatnot. And in 66, I love the premise that a great leader is behind the people, and because he's not competing, everything goes smoothly. And it's the same idea that came up in chapter 78 of the sage is egoless. It's not a big ego trip, it's just doing what's essential, what's in front of him.
Wonderful. Franklin, I have to say that both the ones that you picked are within my top 5 or top 10 favorite ones from here. I'm going to read out Ursula Lingman's translation. My name for this 66 is Leading from Below. Lakes and rivers are lords of the 100 valleys. Why? Because they will go lower. So they are the lords of 100 valleys. Just so, a wise soul, wanting to be above other people, talks to them from below, and to guide them, follows them. And so the wise soul predominates without dominating, and leads without misleading. And people don't get tired of enjoying and praising one who, not competing, has in all the world no competitor. So I like it very much. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Maritza. Joe.
Yeah, I really like the Ursula Le Guin version as well. I'll be reading 68. A good soldier is not violent. A good fighter is not angry. Good winners do not contend. Good employers serve their workers. The best leader follows the will of the people. All of them embody the virtue of non-competition. This is called the virtue of non-contending. This is called employing the power of others. This, since ancient times, has been known as the ultimate unity with heaven. And somebody had asked on Sunday, I believe, some of the links maybe that Stoicism has with the Tao. And one of the things that I kind of took away from here is keeping your emotions in check, not allowing your anger to get the best of you. And that's a really key thing, obviously, in Stoicism, is anger is seen as something that can cause you to act irrationally. But from a coming back to what we had been talking about, I think it also speaks to the importance of humility. And I couldn't help but think about my favorite poem is that the best leader follows the will of the people. And if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose your common touch. And the poem, and so that is like, and I really see there's a direct correlation between those two, and the idea of being virtuous, and that to work towards a common good, I think is what I kind of had taken from this particular one. So that was that's all I had to offer for that particular one. By the way, 33 is my favorite, though. I wanted to say that. I had to say that because
okay. You go bet you to it.
Yeah, I know. I was going to read it.
Even the dogs like it.
Exactly.
Just like Lao Tzu keeps saying, even the trees, even 10,000 things like it. Wonderful. Thank you. And thanks for bringing up if, because it's the spirit is the same.
Very much so.
Fully engaged with life, at the same time having a core which is untouched by whatever stuff that is going on around you, and you persisting in spite of that. It's the same kind of spirit.
And almost being like water.
Yes.
You know, in between those two. It really, if is very, a lot of these actually reminded me of if as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
Next up is Maritza.
So one of my favorite poems is 76. Ursula Le Guin calls it hardness, but I actually call it bending. But hers is actually not my favorite translation. She can't.
Yes.
Would I be off if I wanted to recite in a different language?
No. You would be
That'd be okay.
very much.
All right.
So, are you going to do Chinese?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm going to do Spanish.
Okay,
So
you can do Spanish, and then I might request Jean to
that would
do
be
Spanish.
awesome, actually. So I'm going to read it first in English, and then I'll read it in Spanish. And the one I'm using is from Taoism.net. It is Derek Lin, and it's actually the one that's closest to the Spanish one I'm going to read. While alive, the body is soft and pliant. When dead, it is hard and rigid. All living things, grass and trees, while alive, are soft and supple. When dead, become dry and brittle. Thus, that which is hard and stiff is the follower of death. That which is soft and yielding is the follower of life. Therefore, an inflexible army will not win. A strong tree will be cut down. The big and forceful occupy a lowly position, while the soft and pliant occupy a higher place. This is the Spanish translation. Cuando una persona está viva, es blanda y flexible. Cuando está muerta, se vuelve dura y rígida. Cuando una planta está viva, es blanda y tierna. Cuando está muerta, se vuelve marchita y seca. Por ello, lo duro y lo rígido son compañeros de lo muerto. Lo blando y lo flexible son compañeros de lo vivo. Así pues, un ejército poderoso tiende a caer por su propio peso, al igual que la madera seca está lista para la hacha. Lo grande y poderoso será colocado abajo, lo humilde y débil será honrado. This one's my favorite because I love the reminder that we must bend. And we see these super strong things in nature that are taken down by something that has no visibility. The wind we cannot see, and yet the wind erodes mountains and breaks centuries-old trees. And I find that to be fascinating. And we all need that reminder that if we don't learn how to bend and sway, we will break. Thanks.
Wonderful. This naturally gets us to the topic of translations and what translations are doing for us. So Marisa, let me start with you, because you're reading this in Spanish and English. So tell me, what is it like doing the, looking at it in two different languages?
It's shocking every time I read a Spanish translation that provides something in a different way that resonates, because it doesn't seem like it's so big a difference. But for example, here, the line that's in English, the very last line here says that while the soft and pliant will occupy a higher place. I kind of had trouble with the idea of a lower position and a higher place. In the Spanish translation, several of them, it says the same thing, but it says it, instead of saying that one is above and one is below, it says one holds a place of honor. And it's a very small distinction, but it just resonates in a way that it doesn't in English. And it's, so I'm finding that across several of the poems, it seems very small, but And it's more so in the ones that I can tell which ones are translated by a Spanish speaker and which ones are just like, you know, Stephen's, his direct translation, somebody took it and just translated it to Spanish. You can tell when it's an actual direct translation because there's just nuances that you wouldn't necessarily find in English that you do find in Spanish. I will also say, so I know that you're a very big fan of Ursula Le Guin and a couple people here are fans. So her translation of poem 76, she uses a sword instead of a tree to bring the imagery of hard versus soft. And I don't know, I just liked the ones that use the tree a little better.
She does use sword and the tree, both of them separately.
She does, but she only killing the tree. The tree has no good value in her version.
You are biased in favor of trees. We all know that. So folks, now I want to open the floor only for people who really love some translations and talk about why they love the translations and what their experience has been on translations for this particular work, Tao Teh Ching. So Franklin, you're next.
I do love this translation by Jiafu Feng of number 76. A man is born gentle and weak. At his death, he is hard and stiff. Green plants are tender and filled with sap. At their death, they are withered and dry. Therefore, the stiff and unbending is the disciple of death. The gentle and yielding is the disciple of life. Thus, an army without flexibility never wins a battle. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and strong will fall. The soft and weak will overcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I want to say something about translations. You know, translating actually is very, very hard. Okay. It's not about language. You have to equal the thought. A great translator needs to almost be equal to what they are translating. They have to kind of commune with the author and be able to express that. A great translator usually sometimes takes liberties with it because in their language, they get to that point in a different way. Like that's what I like about Ursula Le Guin. Like she's a good writer. She has the power of expression, and she herself cannot read Chinese, but she has the advantage that she grew up with a father who loved Tao Teh Ching, and he was reading that, talking to her about it ever since she was a little girl. And so that's kind of part of her thinking. And then she has the power of expression that expresses that. And that's why I love the translation, and I use that as a base. And again, also it has to speak to you in the sense that it has to interact with you. I'm looking forward to looking at translations from Indian languages because those Indian languages are different, just like Maritza was talking about Spanish and English. So for example, English is a very direct language, and actually its distance from Chinese is very large. Comparatively, I think Spanish is a little bit closer. I think Marathi, which I read, is even more closer. It is far more metaphorical. Chinese seems to be very metaphorical. You just plunk down these couple of characters and all these connections explode in your mind. That's what the language looks like to me. Of course, I don't know much about Chinese, and I invite anybody who knows Chinese to talk about their experience of reading it in original Chinese versus reading it in English. Okay. Okay. Dave, which translation are you a fan of?
This, oh yeah, I'm unmuted. By Robert Hendricks. I happened to find in the used bookstore, and I'm very delighted. It mentions its documents from Ma Wang Chui, and it says 500 years older than the traditional document that is referenced. And what I wanted to reference is they dug up this tomb and dated that it's very old, and I wanted to talk, but apparently this is an oral tradition, because there were two sets of scrolls, and some of the poems are out of order, and it mentions then one text versus another text or the scroll, some of the lines are out of order. So it seems to me this started as an oral tradition, and different people wrote it down, and of course then wrote it down differently from their memory. And the other thing I'd mention, probably unable to see this, but there are the Chinese characters themselves. And it's interesting because both of these, there's like three, they write in vertical lines, 3 vertical lines, but then whoever's translated has come up with 8 lines of our text.
Okay.
So understand, I mean, just how it's being presented. But what I wanted to say is, I'm trying to get an overview, and I really appreciate listening to Wayne Dyer. And yesterday I referenced this Alan Watts audio that's an hour and 20 minutes. And it was interesting because he talked about Confucianism.
Let's right now we're just talking about translations that we love.
Yeah.
So we can all see, we are all studying this, Dave, and we are trying very hard to figure out what different translations have to offer.
Yeah, well, I think my point is I'm just trying to get an overview of the whole thing.
That's fine. I appreciate that. But what we're doing is I'm doing this entire series of meetups, and for each of the meetups, we're focusing on different aspects, and we're all working together on that. So,
and I appreciate you giving us time, because this is new to all of us. But thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next up is Kevin. And Kevin, I do want to hear from you. What is it like reading it in original Chinese, traditional Chinese versus English? Any thoughts? Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to see this. I mentioned a little bit before. This one, don't forget, it's 2,500 years ago. Environment is different. Language itself change. Word of meaning change itself in Chinese language. For example, that's so big. For me, it's question 2. 2 produces 3. What's 3? What's that mean? Let's say if it's mathematics, computer science, 1 we could do generate 2 we could yin and yang. Yin and yang generate 3. 3 I understand for now. Connection, relationship, or invisible. If from physical perspective, where's dark energy, dark matters? We got 85% for dark matters. So there's no name, since we keep our like modern society people. I see what I see. I see, right? If I didn't see it, I need evidence, need a trial. Those concepts could be. So for me, I'm going to say again, 2 produce 3. What's the 3? 3 could be that's something on the line. Let's see, draw the one circle to another circle, another line. That's though. If you use from I Ching, it's one unbroken line is yang, broken line is yin. Between, you see that's why generate 6, 4, or the 8. Even the big number. That's. By the way, I appreciate all translation. Your own translation matters. Understand different way. As long as you get what you see, it's like Lozi said. I don't know how to name it, and forget like also got another proverb like In the morning, you learn the Dao. In the evening, forget it, get a good sleep. Next day, you got it again. Thank you.
Wonderful. Kevin, okay, let me go ahead. At some point, I want to ask you about the experience of reading. What is the experience like reading original traditional Chinese? Are you able to read? Do you need like modern Chinese translations? How does it work for you?
First of all, in the website, most people get a translation for traditional Chinese. It's a two stream. Hong Kong, Taiwanese is traditional Chinese. In Singapore, mainland of China, it's we follow this simple Chinese. So that's two. When I read, I read 90% of them. And understand, I would say 60 to 60%. Like, you know, some of it is, I'm not sure this meaning. I know it's incorrect. I cannot find the word exactly from Chinese way. Those translation from, I find a few, like from Franklin, I guess that's his translation where it has to be from metaphor, like from that perspective, not real material. You understand big, you know, soft, you know, the bottom like water become the ocean to the on the mountain. Why ocean is like a king, like from that perspective, a container, that powerful understanding. Yeah, I'm learning too.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you.
Madeline, what translation are you using, and what's your experience with translations?
Okay, well, like Franklin, I'm using the Jiao Fu Feng and Jane English translation. And I wanted to talk about it because it's been put together as a very integrated book. They were a married couple. He was Chinese, lived here in the US, and she was American. And she is a fine art photographer. So the book is full of beautiful black and white nature photos, mostly trees, sky, mountain, water, that are completely integrated with the text. In other words, she took them specifically for this and worked with him on the translation to provide images. And so in with every poem, there will be an image sometimes on that page, but usually on the facing page that has a large enough blank area so that he was able to write in calligraphy, was able to write out the poem in Chinese. And so it's a very beautiful integrated presentation because you have the English alphabetic letters on one side, and then on the other, you have the actual resonant imagery of the calligraphy and also the resonant imagery of nature. And I also like it because it was the first one I ever had back in the 70s, and it was the one that spoke to me, and I've always loved it.
Wonderful. Franklin, can you add your thoughts to this about this particular translation, why you like it? You've obviously gone through many translations.
Yeah, well, Madeline, I think, did a beautiful job there. It's smooth, it's clear, it's poetic, and yes, the presentation of beautiful pictures with the calligraphy or the Chinese calligraphy on one side and the English on the other. It is. It's like immersing ourselves in nature. The imagery is as beautiful as the text.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll definitely get that. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Jean. Joe, what do you think about translations?
I like the Ursula Le Guin one for one particular reason and I'll even come back to the idea of the poem If. You know, when you're able to state so much and state it simply, that is really well thought out, and that's really beautiful writing, in my opinion. And when you can really be concise, and I've seen, you know, so I'm actually reading the Wayne Dyer version. I mean, that's the one I'm following really, and that's the one I read from this evening. And I'd read from the one that Ash had put in the chat. I forget which actually version that was, that online version. And there was a fourth version that I'm reading as well. But again, I think that she captures the essence of what the Tao is trying to communicate, and she does it simply. And if you're able to do that, that's a gift. You know, to do it in as few words as possible and as simply as possible, and to still capture where somebody else has to write out, you know, almost 3 or 4 more lines or 5 or 6 more lines. It's not to diminish those lines, but it's the fact that you're still able to communicate what you need to communicate. That means you've really thought it out, you know, thoroughly. So I equate it to almost like stating principles. When you can state principles very succinctly, and you have to be able to state them succinctly, that then you've really thought them out. And I find that to be true with her writing. And that's the reason why I prefer her translation, even though I'm following another one as far as my journaling and everything goes.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, Jean, can you read traditional Chinese, and what is it like in original traditional Chinese and English translations? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I think I have this Chinese and English next to each other. So I don't think it's totally traditional. Maybe it's a little bit. So I want to say, actually in Chinese, it's also have different translation version. They don't really know what the original one is actually. So it's what I found interesting. I heard different translation. I realized, you know, the Li Gun seems like what she does, she's not translating word by word. She even changed the word or even changed the meaning, but it's actually she captured the meaning in some way, you know, because when I read in Chinese, it's very succinct. It's like they use one word to represent many things. So that's why you have multiple interpretations. So even when I read Chinese, I have to use English to fully understand it, because it's very hard to understand. Even you know Chinese, you don't really know what they actually say, you know, a lot of times, because it's so succinct. It's like use one word to represent many, many words. So it's really helped me to see them each next to each other, and also see if their English is right or not. You know, sometimes you see the English is not right. Then sometimes like it helped me to understand Chinese. So I found it's quite interesting learning process. I'm going to get more different translations to see it, but I think it's important to catch the poetry feeling. You know, you have to be very succinct and also rhyme in some way. Like I think that's you really capture, not just translate word by word. You know, then you don't get the essence. I think that's maybe the problem with some of the translation, even the one I have right now.
Yeah, so what I'm finding, I was talking to a colleague of mine who is from China and whose Chinese is pretty good. And her English is also good enough that we can actually communicate at a very deep level. And what she was saying is that especially traditional Chinese, but also Chinese, but especially traditional Chinese, it's like those symbols carry so much. Like each of those letters carry so much. So you just put like 5 or 6 letters down. There are so many connections, and you can just, you know, your mind kind of goes through parallel through multiple connections. And like she needs a Chinese translation to kind of follow the traditional Chinese. And it's not enough to have one translation. She needs multiple Chinese translations to figure out what is being said in Tao Teh Ching. So the way I am approaching it is that I'm using Ursula Lingman as a spine, kind of to get the core of meaning, because she's particularly good at, I think, capturing. And I'm particularly encouraged by your reaction to 2 of her translations. Both the translations you thought were great were from her. And she gets the kind of the main line right, I think. And then I'm reading many, many other translations, because you can just get the one translator can only get like one line, like the main line. And then I'm kind of filling that up with all kinds of branches from other people. Because each of the people, they're interpreting rather than translating. They're interpreting it of how they understand the core of the thought. And each person is bringing this richness and wealth of observations to give you a much more richer picture. I don't think it still captures the grandeur of the original. I don't. So I kind of want to read. I want to start learning traditional Chinese, but it's a very large enterprise. So I don't think I will be able to do that within a month. So I'm going to stick with using multiple translations. The other thing I've started doing, which I recommend you folks, is I've started summarizing. I used Joe's idea. Joe, I've been actually summarizing everything. I've kind of a hybrid between my original idea and your idea. So I said, okay, let me write on each of the poems. So I have like a separate notebook where I have like this much for each of the two pages for each of them. And what I'm doing is that I'm doing as concise a summary in sentences, full sentences of the big points that I got from. I'm not trying to capture everything. It's impossible. I'm just trying to capture, like, these are the main thoughts that I got from it. And I'm about 20% of the way done. So I'm going to go through everything. And then I'm going to take it apart in the sense that I'm going to just take these. It's going to be about 2 to 3 sentences per poem. So it'll be like about 200 sentences. That's what I'm going to have at the end. And then I'm going to put them all together. I'm going to say, okay, what is being said here? Okay, and try to, so it'll be just, so it's like a slow process of, in mathematics, it's called integration by parts. So you take a slice and you try to reduce what does this slice with that slope, etc. What does it add up to? And then you slowly add up these pieces. So that's what I'm trying to do. So at the end of it, hopefully I will have an essay of some kind of just kind of capturing, because it's basically, it's the same thought. It's the same approach to life. And I just want to kind of put it together without losing much. I am losing some things because by its nature, I'm compressing it. But I think I'll end up getting like the core of it. I don't know what it will look like. It may turn out to be 1 sentence at the end, or it may turn out to be a whole essay, but 200 sentences, it's somewhere between 1 to 200 sentences is what I will have. And I will keep on kind of boiling it down to make it kind of together, because there's going to be a lot of repetition in that, different ways. So I'll select the best ways and stuff like that. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and actually I've even broken it down to like almost a quad chart, like where you have it in 4 like translations, just bullets, what are the consistent themes that you're starting to see, across all 4 translations, and then you can kind of get the essence. You'll get closer to the essence because there's so many translations and so many interpretations, but at least you'll have a better idea of what different authors are thinking and how you can arrive at something, that's a little bit more holistic, as opposed to, just looking at 1 or 2 translations. Now, I am, it's longer, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah. Next up is Madeline. Madeline, what do you think?
I actually have a question for you, Shrikant, about later in the month. I've noticed that there seem to be several types of writing about the Tao in here. One is, let's call it about the Tao itself. Another is about how we apply and use the Tao in our lives personally. And then another one is about how it's used in society in the form of the wise ruler or the people. I've never really looked at the book to see what the structure is. My general impression is all the things about rulership are near the end. But I'm wondering if we're going to look at the structure of it in that way or some other way.
Right, that's an excellent question. The way I see it, I mean, if I had to summarize it, I would say I actually categorized everything. What is everything about? So I have a categorization. So of the around 80 pieces, right? About something like close to like 40 pieces are about how do you follow the way. About 20 pieces are about the Tao. What is it? So what is it? How do you follow it? And then there's a whole bunch of pieces, remaining pieces, about the mistakes that you can do in following it, mostly by other people. How can you get it wrong? So it is all about, if I had to say what is the book about, I would say it is about what is Tao and how do you live by it. If you want to compress it further, it's how do you live by the Tao? And everything kind of hangs on that. And society is just kind of an aspect of how do you live, because it is seen as just part of nature. It's not seen as a separate thing. It's like it's part of the world. So that's how that's the division that I see. I don't see a very clear division of subjects across the numbers. There is some kind of emphasis a little bit here and there, like earlier part is more about the Tao and later part is more about the application at a very high level, but it's all mixed up and all those themes are mixed up. So, and if you look at the language itself, it is very much of a parallel processing kind of a language, like the alphabet that we have and the way in which the West organizes writing is highly sequential. That is not the case in Chinese. So it is it's everything in parallel. It is showing you, this is the picture of the whole thing. Get it? Something like that. It is not saying that, okay, this is the first chapter. Once you understand the first chapter, you will understand the second. It's not sequential like that. It is highly parallel structure. So there are, like, even when they are talking about the Tao, immediately there are consequences of it. What does it mean? How you follow it? Or even when they're talking about application in society, they're going back to the nature of Tao all the time. So they're just flowing between all these levels all the time. Kevin.
I got a 2 point. First, if you, before, let's see, for overall book, what these loads want to do. Let's see, first, let's see, do a Google search for, let's see, so they are 500 BCE in China. It's like a small European, like EU. Basically, loads has been, most country, different kind of local language. And he is like chief of National Library. And so that's he understand it war, everything happened between. That's he about to understand life and the earth and the cosmos. So that's the one. Second, learn less if you are loads what you want to do at that time. The second is, can we, set up one session, compare that period of time from Aristotle, and also another. There's so many. Why is that period of time so vast east, and the deep level is very similar approach. We got a lot to see. I do, lots of connection.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I mean, there is a gentleman, he calls it the Axial Age, basically 500 BC plus or minus 200 years. There is this tremendous outgrowth in Greece, in China. You have Lao Tzu, you've got Confucius. In The West, we've got Plato, Aristotle, all those folks. In India, you got Buddhism and Jainism. There is a lot going on during that time. But I do think that they have there are some similarities, but there are massive differences as well in how they approach things. India is very different. China is very different. The West is very different. All three are very different from each other as far as I can see. And what we're trying to do is enormously hard. Okay, and you have to approach it in a massively parallel way. You can't take kind of the approach saying, okay, I'm going to read this book very, very carefully and interpret the word by word. That's not how it's going to work. As Jack was pointing out yesterday, really, really effectively, it's basically nature is all around you. And you have a heart, you have spirit. There is a direct connection possible between your spirit and nature. And that's what you're trying to get at. All these words are just kind of pointing you here and there towards the right way of not taking you too far away from that task. And you can never forget that. And I think both, to have, I mean, it's, firstly, I'm just tremendously delighted because so many of you are actually seriously reading this. You have your favorites, all the observations. I particularly like today's meetup because this is exactly what we need to be doing. Each of us doing our studies separately, from our own heart, trying to get as much as possible and then sharing with each other. That's what, that's, I think, the best way we have. And we will learn from each other. We'll get lots of tips from each other as we go along. So you have to be very patient with yourself, but ultimately it is really between you and nature. There is nobody else that can help you. But if you are doing this, then everything helps you, something like that. So that's how I'm thinking of this. All right. Yes, Franklin, go ahead.
I want to bring your attention to a link that Maritza just left that you'll want to look at. I looked at it and it takes every glyph of the Chinese book and gives you translations of that glyph. So it's just this compendium of words, this giant paragraph. You'll want to look at that. It's powerful and mysterious.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. The other thing, I have kind of multiple translation. The translation that I particularly like, that I'm really intrigued by, though I have not gone through it too much, is the one that Ursula Le Guin's father used. It was done in 1890s, and it's by Paul Carus, C-A-R-U-S. And the great thing about that is that it has not just translation, but it has character by character translation, also in addition to a free-flowing translation. So it allows me, and that's what I've been experimenting with, of pretending to actually read these characters because I'm able to do them word by word, and to see, I'm taking some very, very short poems, and I'm trying to say, okay, now I have got these 20 characters I have to struggle with and see what I can get from that. I don't know what is going to come out of that, but I recommend that. That's because that's a much more easier way to see actually all the actual characters, and side by side there is word by word translation. It's beautiful to actually see it. I like the script visually, and you can start to recognize, man. There is a symbol for man. Now I can recognize that much now. So I'm literate by one character. So only 39,000 to go, and then I'll be able to read. So that's another thing I would recommend. So folks, again, I mean, I'm just very, very excited about this, but we have to be patient with ourselves, with each other, and try to study as much as possible, because the more you put in, the more you're going to get. from it. There are no shortcuts. Try to get the spirit of Taoism, spirit of what is being said, which is very different from the West. So most of the techniques that people kind of reflexively use are not going to be very useful. And so you kind of have to listen. And as again, it was wonderful to have Jean. I want to thank you for getting Jack here. Really, really appreciate that. He did a magnificent job of talking about the spirit.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad we have this group to study together. I always want to study it. So I'm very happy. I think I learned a lot from everyone here.
Yes. And if anybody else has any suggestions about anybody who can help us, you're welcome. So Franklin, can I ask you a couple of questions about your experience with Tao Te Ching?
Yeah, sure. True.
So when did you discover Tao Te Ching?
1977.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see? What does, like, for example, Jack calls it the king of books. What do you see? What is it?
It is like an epiphany. It's like living in a crazy world, and then suddenly somebody parts the veil and you start to see that there's a way through this craziness.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So what has your journey been on? Kind of explain how, like, because you have lived with this book for a long time. How do you end up using it? Do you kind of go back to it? How have you integrated it in your life?
Well, and when it first came into my hands, I dove into it and read it every day a lot. And for a while, I could, recite a lot of these chapters. And for years, I if I had something to do, I would go to the Tao Te Ching to just kind of like get myself composed, and a kind of active meditation. So yes, it was like an active meditation. And I should add that I used it as a with the I Ching, because the I Ching is also this great book of Chinese wisdom. Mm-hmm. And the two of them really work well together. Tao Te Ching is like poetry, sublime, this homage to nature. And I Ching has all of these commentaries by Confucius. So it's very much about, very specific formulas to get your way in and out of situations without disrupting the Tao, so you always stay in tune with whatever's going on. And the astonishing thing about I Ching is, how come we can communicate with, like, this is where C.G. Jung came up with the word synchronicity, because when you're using the I Ching, you're asking a question, and this innate book mm-hmm. seems to hear you and give you an answer like it's a living soul. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. It's like, wait a minute, mm-hmm. how come this thing is having a conversation with me? How does that work? And mm-hmm. so Jung was mystified. So I was using I Ching and Tao Te Ching. But between the two, the Tao Te Ching is the poetry, the sublime. It's like I said earlier, it's like going into the woods and meeting the spirit of the forest as though it's alive in the pages. And the soul of the world is in the soul of the book, and it enters into our soul, and there's this beautiful communion goes on. It's uplifting.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Franklin. I look forward to. I mean, I'm glad that you come here, and I look forward to talking to you more about this. I want to. I mean, for this month, I want to just focus on Tao Te Ching, because it is I Ching. Maybe I will take that. We'll take that up at another time. But I want to get this, because this itself, because this is like, in some ways, not in some way, it is the foundation. Because without this kind of grounding, solid grounding, I don't think you can use the technology. I Ching seems to be more of technology. This is like science. This is like the core of the worldview, philosophy. Would you agree that that's rough?
I think one of the things we're dealing with is the paradoxes in the I Ching relate to the fact that we have a rational spirit and an irrational soul. Now, irrational sounds pejorative, but irrational has to do with our morals, our love, our emotions, right? So irrational is our emotions, but it's also our imagination. And that is the gateway to the spiritual world, right? To contact the spiritual world, you have to go through the soul, which is the imagination. You don't get there through the rational mind. That can help you, can set things up, but you got to go through the soul. And I think the I Ching, or the Tao Teh Ching, all these paradoxes are inherent to the soul. And this is a way of awakening the soul, allowing this dormant lunar side of our mind. In the East, it's very awake. The East is very much the lunar mind. We're very much the solar mind. Now we study the Tao Te Ching, and this other side of our human nature, the soul, starts to say, hey, I know this. How, what am I seeing here? What is this mysterious, what's buried in here? And you're digging like a dog. This is so great. What is this? And it's because it's talking to our soul.
Beautifully put. We spent a lot of time studying Carl Jung, and I see in his work echoes of this, of the concept of self and concept of ego. So concept of consciousness and the larger self. What Tao is essentially telling you is that self is much larger than what you think. You're identifying yourself with the conscious and the products of conscious, but it is much, much larger. The nature is much larger. You are much larger than that. Don't forget that. So that's what I'm getting. That's the commonality I see between Jung and this. What do you think?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. The word awakened comes to mind. We go through life sort of, it's very easy to get trapped in the mundane and in bitterness and to get overwhelmed by the world. But the Tao Te Ching is teaching us to get into that solid center you talked about, to create this stillness inside that is unshaken by anything going on out there. It takes practice, but the Tao is definitely pointing in that direction to go to just like see that whole thing as, well, I don't know, I'm getting lost here, but there is an awakened mind, and it is not the little self. It is not this personality. It's what the ancient Greeks called genius, which is the immortal. There's a part like their myth was the myth of Ur was in a battle. He ended up in the other world where everybody was in a line, and he got in line, and somebody said, "Pay attention." And they went to a river, and they washed in the river, and they, do not go in the river because they're going to forget. You have to remember. Then they met three women, and one woman drew out a cord, and she measured the soul. She measured the life, handed it to her sister. She cut the cord. No, what did the other do? The first one drew out the life. At that moment, another figure stepped up, so that now there was a person to be born and their genius were coming into the world together. They handed the cord to the third sister, who twisted it, gave it our unique weirdness, twisted it and cut it. And then these two figures came into the womb. So we are born with a a family of instincts and a culture of specific cultural traits. But here comes this immortal genius, to some part of us that has been born over and over and over again. And our task is to work through the fate, which is the family and the culture we were born into, right? These are like our karma, is to work with that and through that to recover the immortal genius. And that's also the awakened mind. I think Tao is pointing to the awakened mind. Is like, we have been here so many times. If we can, live with virtue, live with altruism, live with just simple goodness, it will awaken. And, it's like, this is an astonishing difference, the awakened mind compared to this bitter, struggling, irritated little self that we can get, caught in.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Franklin. Leah, you had a comment or a question?
Yes, I wanted to mention something we didn't talk about, and maybe it's for another meeting. None of us selected any of the verses on sort of management of a country.
We will, we will go into it another time, because today, deliberately, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to choose things that speak to us most.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say what spoke to me, not in the one I chose, but is this thread of stopping trying to control other people. And that's a huge part of the Tao Teh Ching. We want to be like water, but we also want to stop trying to control other people. And anyway, that's a huge thread that we just wasn't discussed, but that's very meaningful to me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, great point. So let me ask, let me talk to Franklin about this point. See, because the thing that is very interesting about this point is that the way in which Tao deals with the center is actually very different. In many traditions, in order to get to the center, you go away from the world. You go into solitude. You go into the Himalayas and you go meditate. Taoism is not about that. Taoism is actually achieving this in the middle of life and knowing what moving from that core looks like in the midst of all of the society with all its ills. How do you do it? Right? I mean, it is very much worldly. It is kind of otherworldly in the sense that it is trying to connect to the root, the spirit of nature. I wouldn't call it otherworldly. It is worldly in both ways. It is worldly in the sense that it is kind of capturing the spirit of nature and acting from it. And it embraces all the manifestations of that world, regardless of whether they accept the world spirit or not. So it deals with all the negatives, all the social, social evils and silliness, but does that without losing that center or equanimity. What do you think, Franklin?
Yeah, I think balance is the key. I was so sorry to miss Dr. Wong, but I did catch Dr. Wong's Q&A, and I know that he was emphasizing meditation. And I would be amazed if the Taoist masters were not spending a lot of time in meditation in order to achieve that center that is unshaken by the 10,000 things. I don't know that there's any other way to do it. And the world is not the dream time. And the human soul has this thing in the dream time that we don't want to ignore. Because what is that? What's going on when we dream, right? The awakened mind can wake up in the dream. That's an important detail. I don't know what to say about it, except our culture doesn't emphasize it, but it's there. And I think it's an important piece to look at.
Franklin, how about this? This is a great, I mean, I really love talking to you like this. How about doing this again next Monday? Can we just talk about Tao Te Ching? You're welcome to say whatever you want. And then we would just go back and forth like this. Does that work for you?
Open it up, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So let's do that next Monday, folks. And thank you, Jean and Kevin, for that suggestion. We will go ahead. And I think this, you don't need to prepare anything if you don't want to, but you are welcome to prepare if you want. It doesn't matter, Franklin, either works. This format, interactive format, works very well. It's very powerful. You know, we want to make sure and so let's talk about it.
I'm going to dub you the modern day was it Sophocles? Who is the teacher of Plato? Sophocles?
Socrates, but I don't deserve that, please.
You're the modern day Socrates, because you bring the great philosophy to the polis and you make it very, very easy and very welcoming. And I just honor that. It's such a treat. I'm so happy to have found this.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I don't deserve that, of course. I mean, it's just that I'm trying to learn, Franklin. I mean, I don't know of any other way of learning. I find this to be, you know, I love this stuff. You know, I love this stuff. And I want to understand it. And what I have realized, this is something that, you know, Socrates put it in his own way. But there is a gentleman called Walter Ong who talks about the nature of language. And the core observation that he has is that language is interpretation.
Yeah.
So it's not about just getting things on paper. I'm a big fan of paper. But it's the process of interaction, of creation of thought, getting feedback on the thought. That incessant loop of whether it works very well with writing, because you are able to put things externally and look at it. So you are having a dialogue with yourself. That's the power of writing. But the advantage of having dialogue with other people is that they bring a different context. So if there is basic level of trust and people are genuinely trying to understand what is going on, then you can get enormous amount of value. That's what I've been doing. That's why I've been doing these meetups for 5 years in New York, you know, because it's just so enriching. No matter how hard you try, you have blind spots. You have huge blind spots. You get stuck with all kinds of ideas. And the simple act of actually trying to listen to another human being opens up, corrects, you know, it raises questions in your mind. It requires a lot of discipline. I mean, I have rules that I use, which I have designed very, very carefully. Like, for example, raising your hand so people can speak without being interrupted, keeping on topic so we can have in-depth dialogue without people going all over the place. We can take something and just build a common level, common knowledge, common set of ideas, so we can all move the discussion to deeper and deeper level. Being brief, so we have so many different voices contributing to it. And then most importantly, speaking your mind, even when we disagree, and doing it in a way which is courteous, which respects your own mind, your own take, and those of others, so that everybody feels free to both express their thoughts and they can listen to the other person. So, you know, I think I'm growing much faster as a result of doing these meetups, and I'm just, you know, very touched to see so many people feeling the same way and coming, you know, day after day to add to the richness of this. So Franklin, thank you very much. I will be in touch. I will send you a message, and we will go ahead and do this next Monday. So folks, there are going to be no meetups on Tao Teh Ching till next Monday. So you've got all this time to read up translations. It's very, very short. Read new translations, reread the translations you like, listen to them on YouTube. It takes only an hour to go through the whole book. Do as many iterations. With each iteration, you will get more. This is something that is, you know, that people explore for the entire lifetime, and there is more to say. So next time, by next Monday, when Franklin is here, we'll, you know, let's all kind of get to a new level by then. All right. Thank you very much, folks. Good night.